everyone.
Hello.
Hello. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're on, the Wurundjeri people, the Kulin Nation. I'd also like to talk about why it's important to me to acknowledge country and pay tribute to elders past, present and emerging. I'll touch on it a bit in my talk, but I live in Allambie in Sydney. Allambie is an Aboriginal word and it means peaceful place. Unfortunately, I can't tell you who the traditional custodians of that land is. It's stolen land, and it was stolen so well that the knowledge is lost of who actually owns it. So it's both personally important to me to acknowledge country and to take up the invitation that was laid down in the Uluru Statement for the Heart, which is an invitation for all Australians to work beside our First Nations brothers and sisters towards truth and reconciliation. So acknowledging country is just one simple way that we can tell truth. Barbara.
So, to take this a little bit deeper, in the spirit of what all the talks have done today, we've tapped into this idea of play, of space, who we are, what sparks us, and a sense of presence. And to do that right now and to really expand this notion of being connected to land, I'd like you to just, for a moment, notice your body in space. And I'd like you to notice your skin. It's our biggest organ. And I'd just like you to notice where your clothes are sitting on your body. Your waistband, around your neck, maybe the cloth on your legs. And then I also would like you to notice the temperature. Can you feel the temperature? And possibly even the air pressure on your skin. And then I'd like you to just, for a minute, take yourself down through your body and notice yourself sitting on the ground, on the chair, and the role of gravity. And then think about how that's supporting your body and your feet. And I've not worn any shoes today because I want to feel this ground. And I want to open this space up today to really help us think about this wide context, this land that we're living on. So underneath this floor here, made of wood, is soil. And that soil is a mixture of lives, of soils and rocks and plants and animals and humans and the detritus of our activity, but it also sustains us. And so as we go through today, and as we finish off today, I'd really like to nurture this sense that we have a belonging that goes way past us and we are very much connected to, and how might we hold space for that? Coming back up to ourselves in this room, in the skin, I want to acknowledge the person who actually alerted me to the liveness of my skin. And that was actually years ago. I was running an excursion with some of my students, and we were at the block in Redfern, which is the only piece of land that is owned and run by an Indigenous group. And we came across an Indigenous artist, and he was explaining to us the meaning of the artwork that he was painting. And as that was happening, a cloud went in front of the sun, and he stopped, and the temperature changed, and he said, "Did you notice that?" He said, "That cloud's just gone in front of the sun." And he just stopped talking and he gave it space and time. And what he did was show us how to connect and be plugged into this land, this space that we are part of. And if it had been me, I probably just would have kept on going and not noticed or given that a beat. And that's the kind of thing that we want to draw attention to today as we finish up. And I'm going to throw to Rodger, and he's going to tell you a bit of his story, and then I'll have a turn too.
Thank you. So, I've been a public servant and a designer for 20 years now. I started my career in the Department of Justice in New South Wales, working with victims of crime, victims of sexual assault, child sexual assault, domestic violence, and families of victims of homicide. I didn't get to work with homicide victims. Thinking back to the Ikigai earlier in the day, That's where my passion lies, although I have worked in private sector and on a very broad array of contexts. So 13 years ago, I joined the University of Technology Sydney to lead the Designing Out Crime Research Centre, which I'll talk a little bit more about today. And because of, I guess, where I am in my career, because of the experience I've got, I sometimes get invited to be on advisory boards. So last year, I was invited to be a member of the research committee of Next 25. If you Google them, they're an amazing organisation with a really passionate commitment to advancing Australia's future. Last year, they invited Tyson Yonkaporta along to give us a bit of a pep talk and talk about how we could maybe perhaps improve on what we were doing. And his opening remarks were, "You are not good enough." Now, as a white middle-aged man, when an Aboriginal man tells me that, and when I have dedicated my life to working alongside First Nations people to take on some of the most complex societal challenges in the world, I took that to heart because, I ran this Designing Out Crime Research Centre for 8 years, 150 projects we did together. Our mandate was to develop a new way of taking on complex societal issues, and we did that. We developed the Designing for the Common Good body of work. We published this book in 2016, which is a book of case studies, methods and reflections on how we went about building this body of work. We got to a point where we understood how we were applying design and a designerly way of working in complex societal issues. We got to a point where we felt confident enough to start teaching other people. So we learned a graduate certificate. We launched a graduate certificate of public sector innovation. We contributed back to the literature, so published in criminology, published in design, published in public sector management and leadership. Lots of publications. We won awards, both academic awards. This is me receiving with the team the Vice-Chancellor's Research Excellence Award for collaborative research. Probably the biggest accolade you can get in a university. And as for industry awards, many Good Design Australia awards. This is my team celebrating Best in Show for social design a few years ago. I became a judge for Good Design Australia. My hero, one of my heroes, Andrea, she was the founding director of UK Policy Lab, told me that, "Rodger, you are a pioneer." And yet, I am not good enough. I'm good, don't get me wrong, but I'm nowhere near good enough for the challenges that we're facing. And with Tyson's comment, and with, I guess, I've been in an introspective mood for the last couple of years, building the program with Barbara. I had to do a lot of deep thinking around, well, what is it actually that we're talking about when we talk about strategic innovation and creative thinking and creative intelligence? And I reflected that all of those awards and all of those accolades actually means that I was conforming to the system. I was playing the game of the system. I was doing what the system wanted. And yeah, okay, I've been a part of bringing design into public sector innovation, as have many of you in the room, and many others around the world. But ultimately, my aim of shifting the system around these complex challenges has largely been unfulfilled. I can think of a couple of programs of work that really did shift the system, and like Icarus flying close to the sun, you really know when the wax on your wings starts to melt. When Tyson gave us that very generous feedback, I really did take it to heart. And he talked about how our enemies are actually better at this than we are. he talked about how what he's seeing is that he's got elders that he grew up respecting who are being radicalised by Make America Great Again. We're losing in First Nations communities and in broader Australian society, we're losing young people to right-wing and left-wing extremism generally, as has been talked about earlier today. Okay, so if our enemies are better than us, what's the missing ingredient? And through that introspection and through that really looking at myself, looking at the body of work that I've been doing, looking at the context of work that I've been working in, there was this realisation that actually we're getting in our own ways. We're actually our own worst enemy in public sector innovation on complex societal issues. And we're our own worst enemy because of the initial motivations, the things that initially motivated me to go into design. They're still there in public service. And those of you who've worked with public service will recognise some of the things I'm about to say. So sometimes it feels like Sisyphus, every day getting out of bed and pushing the boulder almost to the top of the hill before it rolls back over you, down to the bottom, and you get to go to bed and wake up the next day. It's feeling really down, isn't it? I promise it gets better, right? And it gets better because of this realisation, or my own realisation, that, okay, I've been part of business as usual. And if business as usual isn't working, we need to try something else. Our colleague, Kees Dorst, has, and some of you designers in the room will know his work around framing. He summed it up by saying, if what you've been trying to do isn't working, try something else. And so what I've been trying to do with Barbara and our colleagues at UTS is to develop a program of work that gives people the tools to go into their organisation and shift that paradigm, shift the business as usual paradigm, drawing on elements that we've heard today. The 70-20-10 rule of innovation was one of them. But to really bring storytelling, I love the Dungeon Master, bring storytelling into your organisation and teams in order to create a different narrative. Forgive my graphic design skills. I was educated as a psychologist and a criminologist. I'm getting there. And I was talking to the guys out at the Canva desk earlier, and I'm like going to full-on convert to them because they're going to help me big time. But we've talked a bit about the double diamond today. This is sort of a bastardisation of that. You'll notice that there's 4 major diamonds and 4 little diamonds. Those little diamonds could be looked at as co-evolution. They could also be looked at as valleys of death of good ideas. But generally, what I'm trying to express with this model is many of you, if you have a close look at the model, you'll recognise elements of a time when you have worked on a slither of this spectrum. Our work at Designing Out Crime was really at this end of the spectrum, really at, what is the problem? Okay, let's reframe the problem. This is the problem. What could some solutions be? Okay, these could be some solutions or interventions. And often that's where we'd finish off. On occasion, we've handed over policy briefs that have been put into policy. We've handed over design specs that have been put to prototype, gone to market, etc. Occasionally, we'd get involved in that. We would very rarely get involved in the other end of the spectrum around, well, did it actually work? So I think what I'm hoping by putting this up is sort of situating my work at this end of the spectrum, although I've, there's little blips where I've done slices along that spectrum. And as a way of, I guess, also illustrating the siloed nature that design practice can be. We've heard about UX, CX, etc., strategic design. There's something underpinning all of those fundamentally, and that's where I think the thread of creativity can help us all in achieving the impact that we want to achieve, and hopefully help us all realise our own ikigai. That model, I love that model, and it's been one of the sort of unwritten models behind the program that we run. So creativity contributes to all different types of thinking. If we look back to the theoretical underpinnings of design and designerly thinking, there's this group, you don't have to do it because I've done it and I'm an academic, you can believe me. There's this group of philosophers called the American pragmatists, and there's a couple of names that you might recognise. Probably some of you, particularly those who are in logic and AI, might recognise Charles Sanders Peirce. Some of you who've worked in education might recognise John Dewey. Those of you who've worked with psychology will recognise William James. So William James, father of psychology in America. John Dewey, huge education reformer. Charles Sanders Peirce, a logician, and it's his work that's on screen at the moment, quoted by our friend and colleague Case. This model for me really helped me move from psychology, criminology, into a designerly way of thinking and doing. So with deduction as a way of thinking, and don't get me wrong, I'm not elevating any of these types of thinking above any of the others, but with deduction, we know what. So for example, we can observe an eclipse. We've got a theory of gravity that helps us explain the movement, and so we can deduce when the next eclipse is going to happen. Now, with the help of AI, we can actually look back 5,000 years of the history of eclipses and 5,000 years forward. So it's a really handy science if you want to find out when the next eclipse is. Now, with induction, this is more the scientific method of developing a hypothesis. So in induction, we don't have the how, we don't have the theory of gravity, but we can observe the movement of planets, and we know where they are going to be. So we infer or induce that there's a theory of gravity, and then we can test that through observation. In engineering, let's say there's a river, a beautiful river, and we want to get across the river, but we want to get across in scale. So in induction, we're going to build a bridge. The what is the bridge, because it's been tried and tested. With normal abduction, we know the outcome that we want. So this morning, I was feeling a bit sleepy, which is surprising because the bed was really fantastically comfortable, and there wasn't a 7-year-old kicking me in the back there and a 9-year-old kicking me in the front there. But I was a bit sleepy this morning. So I was thinking, well, I know that I want a coffee because I want to wake up. So then my only problem is, I'm an experienced coffee drinker. My only problem was, what coffee am I going to drink? I'm in Melbourne. I looked at the Nespresso machine in the hotel room. I said, yep, I'll have that. But that was only my first coffee. And then I went out and went, okay, where's a cafe? Found a cafe, had another coffee. Then I got here and, there's baristas. And, I used to work on the same floor as the designers of those cups and, had a good chat, had another coffee. So in normal abduction, we draw on our own experience of how to do things to get the outcome. And we draw on our experience to bring about the what. With design abduction, it's a little bit trickier than that. We're suspending, we're drawing on John Dewey now, and we're suspending our belief about what the solution could be, how we could get there to get to that outcome. And in fact, we're actually really bracketing that outcome. Okay, this is going to get real practical real soon, because we're going to share an actual exercise that illustrates how to go about that activity. But this notion of design abduction, where we're bracketing all of these different variables, to give ourselves the space and the time to think about what is the actual value we want to achieve in the world, and how could we go about doing that? And then lastly, what interventions should we do to get to there? So that is where we need that creative thread, and we need the creative reboot, because we have been drifting into a future that's not of our choosing. A number of the speakers have talked about that today. And as designers who are shaping the future, we have a sense of responsibility, and we have a position of responsibility and authority to help shape that better world. So I'm going to go and shed off that negative story as Barbara gives us a creative reboot, and I'll be back later with my sleeves rolled up, ready to get into it.
Thanks, Rodger. So what I wanted to do is, how do we do this? How do we get there? And in many ways today, what we've heard is a whole lot of tips and cues about how to get there, and the way that people are actually working and recharging themselves and responding to the challenges in front of them. What is live today for me is the sense that everyone is looking to kind of go beyond where they're at, because there is a sense that the feedback, we haven't quite nailed it. As I was listening today, there was a lot of ideas, and there was also assumptions about what is creativity, what is science, what is play. And there's nothing wrong with any of these assumptions. But if we are to kind of really stretch ourselves and be the best version of ourselves, and maybe even tap into something that we aren't quite yet embracing, we might need to revisit some of those assumptions, because we might be also asking ourselves, how did we get here? And it's not a mistake. We practice ourselves and we bring ourselves into being. Just like she started off talking about this morning, about how we might be shaped by the world around us. And she talked about Karl Marx and Engels. Yes, our social worlds do shape us, and our designs shape us, and we shape them. But also, we have a choice to shape ourselves, and we practice ourselves, and every moment of our being is a choice. Yesterday, as we were walking here, it was a great moment actually. We were walking between a sort of one of those beautiful archways with the flagstone pathways, and we saw this little boy running, madly, looking like he actually really wasn't in control at all, and maybe he's going to kind of belt out onto the street. And Rodger leapt into action thinking, oh, we better get this little boy before he does do something crazy. And he was running across the archway, and as Rodger went to kind of catch the little boy, he saw just behind the archway that we couldn't see, the dad going like this. But what Rodger did was, he, in that moment when there is something and I need to respond to it, and that is often what we are missing. So what is it? What are our choices? So first thing is possibly to revisit what we think thinking is and what we think the mind is. So how many of you kind of would abide by the idea that the mind sits here in this bone skull, helmet? That's where it all happens. This is where the smart stuff happens. How many of you have thought of this idea that the mind is actually something that is distributed through our whole body? How could we possibly see or hear or think or feel or respond to our heart or our gut if we didn't have a body? And we've heard about how important that is, but most of the time we operate in a way where we kind of bypass the filters that come through. So things like today I talked about the air pressure on our skin. How much do we actually pay attention to that? And if we want to change the world in front of us, if we want to change the way that we are with each other, with ourselves, and very much the way that we use the resources of the world around us, we need to change how we do us. We need to reconsider what we think thinking is. We need to reconsider how we pattern ourselves and how our memories are shaped. And so there is a revisiting of our assumptions as we start to kind of get into this reflective space. And I have a few hacks or invitations for expansion. So part of it is, and again, all of these things have been talked about today, is how we might attend to our experiences, our moment-to-moment experiences differently. Now, I was going to suggest to everyone that they take their shoes off, but then people said, well, that could create an aroma experience. and it might well. Actually, it's interesting today that we haven't talked about scent, which is one of our most provocative ways of creating memory and meaning. And once you have a scent experience, it's very hard to bypass that. It's very interesting. So this again is an example of like, what are we paying attention to as designers, as creators of the world, as artists of living? And that is my provocation, is how might we be artists of life more than designers of life? Yes, we are designers of life, but it's the bigger story. And we're all dancing in this together with a whole range of other life sources around us. So how do we feel differently? How do we pay attention differently? And this is what we call, in our course, the quality without a name. So we are very into naming, defining, measuring, and today we've talked a lot about sort of formulas and schemas for defining things, and that's fine, and that's really useful, and it's very important. But we've also talked about how we've sort of become ridden with sort of mandates to do and to measure and to behave in a particular way. And today we talked about how play is one of those mediums, those things that we can tap as humans, and how deeply important they are to us to play, the spirit and the experience of play. This is partly a definition that is, or it's not even a definition, I don't want to call it a definition, I want to point to the qualities that come out of it. So it's not like what it is as much as how it is, and how do we recognise when that is happening, and how do we step back and just give it space to happen. And my big teachers in this area have been kids, and also artists who work, playing music, painting, making costume. I've worked in a whole cross-section all the way from sort of film through to art exhibitions, and they often don't work in a formulaic way. And there's a lot of play and a lot of experimentation, and it seems like it's purposeless and it's like waste of time. But it's not, because we're making discoveries all the time, and that's that divergent phase. But we don't structure it. And every single scenario is different. And yet there is an alertness that is grabbing all this stuff. And then it's there, and bang, we can bring it to the ground when we need to. And I've seen that happen over and over again. So Stuart Brown, who's one of the only people I know who's really done a deep dive into the idea of play, talks about how it is an evolutionary capacity for existence. It's how we experiment and find the edges, and we need to be doing this lifelong. We need to be learning forever, and we shouldn't give up. And as soon as we formularize something, and as soon as we're getting feedback that it isn't quite working, or even that we're bored, or that it's too stressful, all these things that we've talked about today, they are cues. That feedback, that feeling, that sensation is a cue that we need to move again. So there's a constant state of evolution. And we as a society and as a culture are constantly moving. It's not a fixed thing. And the other thing about play is it bonds or binds emotion with lived, grounded experience. And it has a unique way of connecting multiple regions of the brain, multiple ways of thinking. And when I talk about the brain, I'm also talking about the mind. So there are parts of our brain that is actually geared or specialised to tap into our physical sensations that come from our heart, our mind, our gut, our skin, our whole mind. What do we do when we play? And these are the things that I would say, okay, in a meeting, walking down a road, wherever you are, and this is the sort of stuff that we really try to encourage people to feel confident in being able to do when they go out and they're having meetings, or whatever the context is they're working in. And for me, I actually do a lot of work with people who have really challenging health conditions. And their health conditions do not have a name, and they don't have a language. So we have to find other ways to explore the space and make those discoveries, to surface what's going on at that moment in time. So we need to be open to exploring the possible. We need to handicap power. So that's what, again, if you're playing with kids and if it's not a game and it's not playful, if you're like, man, I've played footy forever, watch me, I'm going to knock you out of the park here, and there's a little 2-year-old who's just trying to kick a ball. That's not play. You intentionally go, okay, how can I make myself on the same level as you? I might, do it on my knees. We get inventive. But play is a space where we actually try and make ourselves equal, but also in a place of exchange, mutual exchange. It's about finding connection. It's about exploring the boundaries wherever we're at, with whoever we are with. It's real world stuff. And it also embraces novelty and serendipity. So the fact that I'm not wearing shoes today, I was going to wear shoes today. And then for some reason, and I still haven't really quite got to the bottom of why, I was standing here today and I was watching everyone come in their winter clothes, and I was sort of feeling like, we're in this amazing environment. We can see, the sky outside, and yet I sort of felt disconnected from the outside. And then I got this little kind of voice, why don't you just not wear shoes on stage today? And I thought about it, and I was like, nah. And then I thought, why not? And because what I want to talk about today is also about being grounded and paying attention to the world that around us that is grounded, to remembering what our body knows, because our body is where we create meaning. And often the mind forgets, but the body remembers. And so just by simply moving and triggering sensation, we can call up things that we have forgotten. And so when we're sitting there in strategy meetings with our kind of sticky notes and our paper, our pens and papers, we're only calling up a slither of what we might be able to bring up. So how can we possibly think imaginatively and creatively? So this is really where, if you get a little idea and it's like, let's go outside, let's play with sand, let's invite some other people in, do it. And harness this other realm of sensation and memory and possibility, because we are narrowing down the scope of what we can be. And paying attention to our senses actually taps into this other sense called interoception. This is the sense that is linked to intuition. It's the one that we become aware of coalescing senses in our body. So we've talked about in the heart and the gut. How many of you are aware of your guts right now? Maybe they're hungry. And how many of you can feel your hearts? I can feel my heart. There's a lot of energy going on up here. But, stopping to pay attention to those signals in and of itself can actually shape even how we interact with people, the tone of voice, how we make eye contact. All these things subtly are tuning us all the time and shape how we respond to each other. And that is where we can call up this meaning-making space that is so deep and so profound in terms of connection and what we want to do and why we're doing it. It also helps us to regulate ourselves, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. Some of the simple things that we can do to kind of step into this intuitive interoception space is to do meditative activity. That can be something as simple as colouring in with a pencil, or just drawing line, circle, circle, circle. It's just repetitive activity, and it lulls us into a state of calm. Children do it all the time. Another one I did the other day, I had really hot brain, and I was thinking, I've been working just go all day, and my day had involved Lego, and at the end of the day I was breaking it up into just single parts, red, yellow, blue, blah. And I realised by the time I'd finished organising that Lego back into its little boxes, I was feeling chilled out again. And it was just that simple activity of organising the Lego. I have a memory of playing Lego. I played it heaps as a kid. So my body remembers that it's a fun, playful space. So simple things like that can really take us somewhere else. Exercise, movement, and then also just attending to what I call the fleeting moments. So this is all about the quality of our experience. And this is not something that you can name or pin down. It's something that we need to hone into the intensity of it, the persistence of it, the reverberation where it's resonating, its relationship to our memory, and then we can step into this space of what I would call witnessing ourselves, witnessing our reactions. And sometimes those reactions are reactions that help us to know and do, because we're drawing on things that we need to respond to in the moment, and we can draw up this well of wisdom that from our time on the planet. And other times we are carrying into the situation all kinds of assumptions that are actually blocking us, or things that are default behaviours that we don't need to do. So we sort of step in there and go, okay, why does that noise really irritate me? Or the way that that person's speaking, or I don't want to sit there, whatever those things are. We can step back and become aware of this much bigger, wider space that we're responding to, and then become kind of more attuned, and we make those decisions. So this is where what I call the link between creativity and the seventh sense. This sense of being able to witness how we think, what the mind is and what we're doing with it, and self-regulate, to be able to respond to those moments that are sparking us, that are like those drivers, those heartfelt moments, those things that we love, but also at the same time to chill out a little bit and actually hold space for all kinds of other people doing how they do life, and to be able to cope with those moments where we have resistance, and to revisit our resistance and our assumption. And just like with this talk just now with Dungeons and Dragons, to actually get into and find a flow space in those seemingly boring, mundane things. So that's what I would call self-regulation. So quick circle around. I know we're running out of time. Okay, so today we were here for creativity. We've been exploring creativity. How can we circle through, weave it all together, and hold on to this quality that we might call creativity? Can we call it a kind of awareness? It's where we access our memory and where we find meaning. But it's what I would also call the homeostatic impulse. It's that sense of recalibration and balancing, and also stepping into the edges to find the new. So today I would say there was actually a global call to stretch into something more, to claim and own something that was once part of our practice and that has sort of been siphoned out. And what I've heard today is not unique to design. I have been in so many forums over the last few months, and I can tell you that this is something that many sectors are experiencing, this sense of like, why are we doing this? What is this for? Surely there is something more meaningful to what we're doing and how we're doing it. And this is also a wider call to creativity. One of the other things that I constantly am finding is that people cut out this whole version of themselves because they say, I'm not creative. Now, I don't think that's something that we're dealing with in this room, but I do think as creatives, we can actually open up the space for other people. And that's part of what our duty is actually, is to go, here's how, and yes, you are. And there's this huge gamut of possibility. And when we do that together, then we move into a completely different kind of space. So the other thing is, and this is where creativity and play dance very closely together, is creativity actually doesn't like formulas. This is stuff that has been well researched by people who get into the science of creativity. They're looking for those repetitive patterns, those things that are traits of creativity. And wouldn't it be nice if we could put it in a formula in a bottle and go, here it is, and this is how you drink it? It doesn't work like that. It actually does best when it's relaxed. It does best when we remove our critical judge. So we have to kind of be open and vulnerable and in a trusting space. We've heard about that today. It's when we suspend our utility focus. That is, I got to get shit done type stuff, and we've got X, Y, and Z to do. There's a strange dichotomy there. We need to be able to actually go, even if it's for 5 minutes, to let go of that utility focus, because we're going to discover things that we won't discover if we're going, that's where we're going. So it's that kind of weird paradox of, if you want to go wide and you want to land it there, somehow you've got to let go of that landing point there to get there. And that is not something that you can nail down into any kind of brief. It's a sensing dynamic, and it will change from circumstance to circumstance. Context is important. The people that you're working with are important. The room that you're in is important. The place that you're working, you've got to riff with these dynamics, and the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. And that is when you will find things that you didn't find. But the other thing is that creativity just pops out when you're not expecting it. Those things of, like, you're in the shower and you're walking and you get what they call those aha moments. And those aha moments can be bingo, that's it. And then they can also just be very quiet, like, you know, a little voice in your head. And one of the things that creatives get better at is this intuitive link between going, yes, okay, that is a thing. I'm gonna get that. So it could be in the shower, it could be working, when you're on a walk. It could be whenever. You won't know when it's going to come, but you've got to be alert to it. Someone was saying to me the other day that one of the differences between people who are creative and not creative is whether an idea passes you by or you grab that idea and make it happen. So these are some of the qualities. Again, the quality of being creative. And it's the unseen, the unknown, and knowing when to grab it. And that is a collective thing. Creativity is a personal thing. We've heard about that today, but it is a social thing as well. And this is one of the things I love about music and collaborative spaces, and design is inherently collaborative, but also you are in collaboration with society, with culture, and with the world that we're making. And so what is this quality that you're looking for? It's that feeling of moving from being an observer to being deeply connected. You have a felt shift. How do you describe that? It's a feeling. You move from feeling separate to feeling connected. And you move from wanting to belong to feeling a feeling of belonging. And then we start to find a sense of worth in the world and what we're doing. And I think that has been one of the kind of percolating qualities that have gone through every day's, all the talks today. And I'm going to call it a quality because that's where we're ending. So we have a little exercise because we want to extract the qualities out of the room in here today. And we are 1 second down, and we're going to throw this out to you, and I'm going to ask you all to try and play with this as we go into our drinks today. So we play with metaphors. Metaphors is one of these beautiful ways where we can catch ourselves in action. They are the melting pot of our emotions and our meanings. And, you know, I've heard of like killing two birds with one stone today, and the rabbits, and, you know, actually it's really interesting if you grab a metaphor and you try and remake it, and you try and remake it into something that it has the quality that you want. So as you're going around and you're writing, we're going to get you to make a collective renku in a minute. Just be aware of the sort of metaphors that are coming up for you. Are they competitive competitions, metaphors of separation, or are they something where we might find ourselves in union with each other, in collaboration with this life that we find ourselves in? And that is where we step into this space of abduction, where we might be able to harness this abductive space that Rodger was talking about, but we need to give it time, like proper time, not scheduled time, chronos time, lifetime, and we need to spend time developing this attunement to the world around us. And I'm going to hand to Rodger.
So, near you, you'll find a piece of paper. I'd like to invite you to take that piece of paper with you to drinks and to find 7 people that you don't know to write a poem together. That poem is a call to action that sums up today for you. There's a QR code on the piece of paper. If you could kindly take a photo of your poem and upload it to that site. I've spoken with the awesome people from Canva, and we're going to do a whiteboard, and we'll put all of the photos on that whiteboard for you guys to share. It's a call to action. It's drawing on these positive drivers. So before, when I was talking about abduction, I think design is really, one of the things that design is the creation of value in the world. And of course, when we do research, design research, user research, we're trying to understand, well, what is that value relative to our service offering or product offering? Here's a cheat sheet. Here's 15 positive drivers. We're going to write a bunch of poems, probably 100 poems over drinks. And the instructions of the poem are on the piece of paper, so we don't... You've
got a pencil and a paper. Please pick them up. They're scattered out throughout the room, and then as you take them up and just move them around, and then if you get to the last line, just take a photo and upload it with the QR code.
And if you'd like to know more, our most recent book is Creative Reboot. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you. Sorry to be a bit over time. Thanks all. Love you.